7 minutes, 420 seconds. That is how fast it takes civilians and normal people to get hands on guns in many places around the world. And ladies and gentlemen, as a result of this accessibility of getting violent guns, more and more do we see acts of civilian violence. The proposition makes it seem as if the only violence that exists in society is from police, but they fail to see that there's so many other acts of violence. Just recently, we saw the Dallas shooting in which police, defenders of the law, were killed by citizens. As we saw in Omar Mateen, he used AR-15 weapons to kill 50 innocent people. As we saw in France, right after the Paris shootings, these civilians had cars filled with weapons. And this just shows how the accessibility of these lethal weapons is just making more and more the prevalence of this violence from the normal people. And thus, in response to this, we believe that the police should also be able to carry the lethal weapons in response. So in our side-on-side opposition, we would like to live in a different world, and a world that's different from propositions. That is why we have a counter-proposal. So we're saying that we're okay with a spectrum of weapons. We're okay with the non-lethal weapons, such as the batons and tasers, but we also believe that we need to have the lethal weapons, such as the guns and the knives. However, we think that to prevent the police from using it and abusing it, we should administer this. This means, no thank you sir, that we should use cameras on these guns to see if the protocol is being used. That means we should have harsher punishments so that they can fear and have some sense of fear to not violate the protocol. That these people who violate the protocol should be tried in the court of law, and we should in general make the proceedings more transparent. Another method we also think is that we should diversify the police force, so thank you sir, so that we can mitigate this violence based on race and color and ethnicity. And above this, we still believe that the police should be able to carry lethal weapons. So what will I be telling you in this debate? Firstly, I'll be going through some rebuttals before telling you 3 arguments in my first speech. How it is necessary for the police to carry lethal weapons, how it can be a way to deter violence from the crime-age sector, and thirdly, how it can reduce the effectiveness of the police force. Yes?
Would you give normal patrol policemen the capability to fight gang members with assault rifles on your side of the house?
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that these policemen should be able to defend themselves. We are talking about people who are risking their lives, going to this job, not knowing whether that will be their last day or not. And if they're going to fight these people such as gang members, they should be able to carry these weapons, be able to carry these lethal weapons to induce fear into these gang members and actually win the battle, and then actually be able to be confident in their abilities, rather than just going into these violent situations with tasers and batons. So now, my rebuttals. They said that they wouldn't allow police members to have these lethal weapons, but then they would allow the SWAT members if need be. So what they're saying is that they're acknowledging the force and the effectiveness of using lethal weapons. But they don't consider the nature, inherent way of being that the SWAT team is. It's not that easy. If you see someone on the street being violent, you can't just call a SWAT team and they send in their troops. It takes time, and it's large scale, and in most scenarios, it won't really apply with SWAT teams. And most things, we can see that in a matter of seconds, it can be between 5 lives lost or 10 lives lost. And in situations when this time is so essential, we cannot risk people's lives by waiting for SWAT teams, and thus we need people, normal policemen, to have these weapons. Now, they secondly said that the policemen are automatically being violent, and that is all the cause of our problems. What we say is that protocol exists, ladies and gentlemen. There's a progression of violence that exists. First, you talk to them, you tell them to stop being violent. Then you threaten to use the violence. Then you use batons and other small things like that. And then only if it still has a problem, then you take it to the next level. And they said some isolated cases about the shootings that we heard recently. But we say that these are just some isolated scenarios. And we can fix this. So thank you, ma'am, by just fixing the systemic problem of this issue of police brutality and this knee-jerk reaction, not simply just take away their ability to fight anything by taking away their guns. Now, the third rebuttal is how they said the police only need the weapons to defend themselves. And we think on side opposition that it's quite a concessions that they're making. First of all, how can you defend yourself, and how can these police defend themselves without any lethal weapons? I mean, if another person has a gun, you're not going to be able to defend yourself with a taser, not going to be able to command the situation with a baton. And then secondly, how do you even know the situations in which you need to defend yourself or not? You don't. So simply put, you need to be carrying these lethal weapons at all times. So firstly, my first argument is why these lethal weapons are necessary for the police force to fulfill their duty. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have to understand is that crime is prominent. we're living in a more in-order society in which crime is more prevalent, and inherently we see that people are acting out. And this is the reason why we need police force to be carrying these weapons in the first place. Because we need to ask the question, what are police's force, what is their job essentially? Well, when they take up this job, they're also taking up the responsibility to maintain peace and protect civilians and to deal with the crime. And to do this, they're especially trained to do so. So the question is, how are they trained? Well, like I said, there's a degrees of response. They're proportional to the action. For example, if there's two guys fighting in an alley, the protocol is first to talk to them to stop their violence. Then secondly, they might threaten to use the baton and say that they'll get involved. Thirdly, they might use the baton, and only if it still hasn't subsided, then only will it escalate to the point in which these guns use these lethal weapons. However, in our counter-proposal, in our world, people will be accountable to follow this protocol, as we have cameras, as they're induced fear of being tried in court, as they'll be actually following this protocol rather than being so easily violating the protocol, leading to this immediate escalation of the issue. So then the question remains, when do we know, how do the police know when to use the lethality? Well, these are the scenarios in which the people are aiming or threatening to use these guns against the civilians or the police. And then only will they take it to the level of using these lethal weapons. Why? Because you have to understand that the police's job is to mitigate the violence. And the greatest likelihood of them actually mitigating the violence and preventing the crime is if they have something automatic. No, thank you, ma'am. Immediately being able to solve the problem and immediately being able to take out the killer. As opposed to in this world of batons and tasers, if someone's pointing a gun at the police, there's no time for the police to run over them, mysteriously dodge them, and smack them with a baton or taser them. That's not going to work, ladies and gentlemen. And these tranquilizers, they can easily be combated with vests on the road people's side. So we need these lethal weapons that can actually make a difference. The second reason, the thing is that when you have these lethal weapons for the police, you allow the police to effectively fulfill their job. And we believe on the opposition side that it's a state right for these lethal weapons to be used. Now the second point is the deterrence of violence. What we see is that weapons are scary. They have the potential to take lives. When you understand the calculus of the criminals, when you have a standoff, they want to be self-preserving. So they're not going to escalate the violence, they're simply going to back down as they know that the guns can make a difference. And on the other hand, when it's not lethal, then they will escalate it. They'll think that they can beat the police who have a baton, they can beat the police who have a taser, and thus they'll take the violence to the next level, and these rogue people will just get into more fights and more scuffles with the police, and the violence will just cause more harm in the future. And which this, as we saw, the reason that this happens is that they believe that they can defeat the police. These drug cartels in South America believe that they're stronger than the police. That is why they use the violence and force. Now, all in all, we can see that in conclusion, we want to live in a peaceful world in which the people effectively know that they're not going to live their last days simply because some person's going to mug them or some person's going to have a standoff with them and threaten their lives. And if we want this peaceful and confident way of living to be maintained, then we need to have some strength in the police force. We need to have some confidence in the police force. And if this is the world we want to live in, then the police force should have these lethal weapons. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, side opposition is under this strange illusion that guns will somehow stop every act of terror known to man. That somehow having a small handgun will solve the Orlando shooting because they will preempt this attack using this mind reading of their guns. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't accept their concessions, and we would like them to clarify such issues. Firstly, I'd like to highlight 3 points of rebuttal. Firstly, when opposition advocates reducing these crimes of violence, they offered little analysis on why it's mutually exclusive to using lethal force. Ladies and gentlemen, for them to even have a chance to advance in this debate, they need to clarify why that killing someone is ever going to satisfy this urge of ending any sort of crimes of this nature. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, when first of all provided this utopian perspective of how the police will follow this some sort of protocol using baton, talking down. Ladies and gentlemen, police in status quo will use their guns by default. When they know that's the easiest way to control the situation, batons are less likely to be used because they realize that people will listen to them if they have a gun in hand. What are you going to listen to more, ladies and gentlemen? If you have a gun, or you say, hello, I'm going to help you. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that they need to clarify such an issue because we don't live in such utopian perspective. And they brought this issue about gangs, ladies and gentlemen, and how gangs will somehow arm up against the police and there'll be massive shooting. We believe this happens on both sides of the house. But we believe that we will solve this issue inherently because firstly, if the police aren't armed, more people will start to support the police because they realize that the gangs aren't for them. Currently in the status quo, gangs are like parallel to police where they stand up to the police brutality and offer some sort of support to the community, ladies and gentlemen. When we realize that the police are not armed and not shooting people in some cases, as we know currently is a major issue, we realize that the police get more support from the community, which is necessary for them to ever oppose such gangs. When they realize that gangs aren't for them and that the police will stand up for them and they don't hurt, the police have no inherent malicious thought to them, we believe that this is what's necessary in the status quo. Now, one of my first attempts today is how outside the house we make policing better, don't you agree?
You say that you don't agree with the use of force. Then why are you guys okay with using SWAT teams?
We believe that SWAT teams is a last resort, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that you can't always rely on the fact that a situation can be handled by certain procedures that we highlighted in Kate's first speech. We believe that there's always a last resort to sort to because there's always excruciating circumstances which needs to be handled. Now, firstly, how does outside make policing better? The nature of weapons is that they cause hostility in nature. How does this work? Mr. Speaker, lethal weapons have the capability and the inherent function to be lethal and to kill the intended target. Now, for the common person, now they have the view that they can easily fall victim to this lethal force. So with terrible race relations amounting to this, communities become even more suspicious of the very same people that they were supposed to protect. And why is this particularly bad on both sides of the house, and why we believe we target such an issue? Firstly, it clearly and unquestionably alienates the communities, and ladies and gentlemen, they offer no analysis of why they suddenly solve this issue. They'll only exacerbate it. We'll need to hear something from their second part. We think that when weapons are introduced, police become a threat, regardless of what first advocated about using batons or talking to them, because they realize that they always have a gun, and they always have the possibility to become a dead body and become the next news tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We don't believe this on our side of the house. Moreover, why should we care about such issues? Because people are far less likely to approach the police as a force that is set to protect them. Now, what does this mean on both sides of the house? When you see something wrong in your neighborhood, when you get robbed, ladies and gentlemen, you are less likely to go to police if you fear the police are going to do something to you in return. So that no matter what happens, you will not resort to the police. So thank you. Now, why does this matter? Because the police as a force relies heavily on community involvement. It has no power if the community isn't going to be involved with them, especially in trials, ladies and gentlemen, which I will cover on next. And without the proper communication, there's an ineffective police force, the community can't survive, and this is the community that both sides of the house should not be advocating, and something they'll need to comment on later on. How does this change on our side of the house? When the police take the first step in improving public relations, when they realize that there's something inherently wrong with the amount of police shootings going on today, and they drop their weapons and they take off less lethal force, we realize that the community is going to respond better to this, Mr. Speaker. I'll take you in a second. Because when they help the police in their duties, they realize that now the police aren't inherently for me. They don't use whatever force to try to kill me, for example. We believe this only will improve race relations. Don't you agree?
So you questioned our protocol and you said that people are going to listen to them as they have guns and not only with a baton.